Welcome, dear listeners. We've now crossed over 12,000 subscribers, and I want to say a heartfelt thank you for all of you who've become a part of this growing community, not just for horror, but for something deeper, for stories that make us feel. Thank you. Truly, I'm grateful we're here together. In this video, we'll travel across 5 countries, from England to India, from the forests of Japan to the storm-battered coastlines of the Philippines. We'll step inside the silence left behind when someone vanishes without a trace. These are stories inspired by the missing 411 phenomenon, a term used for real disappearances that defy logic, pattern, or resolution. The name itself comes from an early set of unexplained cases compiled by former detective David Paulides. 411 is a nod to the old telephone directory code for information. But in these stories, information is exactly what's missing. I just want to say as a side, and really not a side, thank you to our member Peter Hargraves Geo for suggesting this subject. What happened? Why? Could it have been something supernatural or something deeply human? Each of these stories is based on true events. You'll hear quotes from those involved. We approach these stories with deep respect for those affected. This isn't sensationalism. It's a way of holding space for the grief, the questions, and sometimes the strange truths that emerge when reality becomes unrecognizable. 16-year-old Ruth Wilson vanished on a cold November afternoon in 1995. She lived in the quiet village of Wsworth in Surrey, not the kind of place where people simply disappear. Ruth wasn't wild or impulsive, or known for breaking rules. She played the violin. She wore oversized jumpers. She loved books. On the day she disappeared, she told her stepmother she was meeting a friend after school. She wasn't. Instead, she took a taxi to a place called Box Hill. It's a striking spot, forested, high above the town, beautiful in summer. But that day was grey, wet, miserable. Her driver said Ruth got out near the top and stood near an old pub that had long since shut down. She didn't seem upset. She told him she was meeting someone. He believed her. But Ruth never came home, and no one ever saw her again. No footprints were found. No bag. No phone calls. Just gone. The next day, her school friends received letters written by Ruth, apologizing. Not for running away, not for hurting anyone, just apologies without explanation. And that was the first clue something was wrong. Then it came out, a family secret. Ruth had recently discovered something her parents had kept from her, that her mother, who had died years earlier, hadn't died by accident, as she'd always believed. She had taken her own life. No one had told her. She'd found out on her own. And then she changed. Quietly, internally, the way grief often moves, not in sobs, but in stillness. In the weeks before her disappearance, her friends said she seemed more distant. Her teacher said she was distracted, but no one expected this. The strange thing? There were sightings, People claim to have seen her. A woman matching her description near a youth hostel, a train station. But nothing was confirmed. The police never found her. Not a body, not a note, just silence. Over the years, theories swirled that she ended her life like a mother, that she was abducted, that she started over somewhere new with a new name, a new story, and simply never looked back. Some believe she planned it. Others believe she wanted to be found, but no one knew where to look. Her father rarely spoke publicly. Her stepmother died a few years later. But friends have said one thing again and again, that Ruth was thoughtful, private, and overwhelmed by a truth she hadn't been given space to understand. We don't know what she felt standing there on Box Hill, but we know she stood there, just long enough for a taxi driver to drive away. And by the time someone looked for her, she was already part of the fog. She disappeared, then came back, and didn't remember she'd been gone. That's how it began in 2008. Hannah Up, 23 years old, a vibrant, well-loved school teacher in Manhattan, stepped out of her apartment to go for a jog. It was summer, warm, ordinary, and then she vanished. No note, no sign of struggle. Her purse, her phone, all left behind. Police launched a search. Her friends posted flyers. Her face appeared on the news. Have you seen this woman? Days passed, then a week, 2. People assumed the worst. 17 days later, someone spotted her, floating face down in the Hudson River. She was alive, unconscious, sunburnt, suffering from severe dehydration and hypothermia, but alive. And when she woke up, she said something strange. I remember getting ready for a run, and then waking up in an ambulance. That entire window of time, nearly 3 weeks, was missing. Gone. No memory. She had no idea what she'd done, where she'd gone, or how she'd even ended up in the river. Doctors diagnosed her with something rare. Dissociative fugue, a psychiatric condition where a person, usually triggered by emotional stress or trauma, enters a kind of identity blackout. They lose awareness of who they are, sometimes for days or weeks, and they go places. They function. They appear normal to others. But it's as if their soul has stepped aside. In Hannah's case, that blackout lasted 17 days. Security cameras later revealed she'd been wandering the city, shopping, staying at a hotel. She'd even gone to work, taught her students, smiling and present. She didn't remember any of it. And for a while, Hannah was okay. She went back to teaching. She told her friends and family she wanted to understand what happened. She saw a therapist. She was candid about her fears. How do you feel guilty for something you didn't even know you did? It's not your fault, but it's still somehow you. But that wasn't the end. In 2013, it happened again. She disappeared for 2 days while working at a new school in Maryland. This time, they found her in a creek, soaked and disoriented. She had no idea how she got there. But then her diagnosis was known. Her colleagues and families were cautious. They began to understand that something inside Hannah could unspool without warning. So she made plans. She took precautions. She always let someone know if she was going out. She carried ID, emergency contact cards. She never swam alone, until she did. In 2017, Hannah was working at school in the US Virgin Islands, St. Thomas. She loved it there. The sea, the students, the freedom. One morning, she told her roommate she was going for a swim. She never came back. They found her clothes neatly folded on a beach chair, her keys, her sandals, but no body, no trace. Days later, a hurricane hit the island, complicating any search. Weeks passed, then months. She was 32 years old. Her family refused to believe she was dead. Her mother, Barbara, said, "I know she's out there. I feel it. She could still be in a fugue." Some speculated that she'd entered a fugue and drowned. Others wondered if she had simply walked away from everything, unintentionally or not. But Hannah herself had once said, "There's this fear that one day I'll wake up and I'll be 50 years old, and I'll have missed my life." What happens when your own mind turns on you? When your consciousness becomes a fragile thread, easily severed? Hannah wasn't unstable. She wasn't dangerous. She was kind, smart, beloved. She was trying to heal, but her sense of self, that inner tether, was unpredictable, vulnerable. A therapist who worked with fugue patients once said, "The self is a house, and for some people, the front door doesn't always lock." Hannah had locked it as best she could, but maybe the wind found its way in anyway. And maybe she stepped through it. One last time. In 2012, a young man named Jonathan Spolan arrived in Rishikesh, India. He was 28 years old, an Irish journalist. Smart, quiet, thoughtful. He'd worked with the International Herald Tribune, had a future in media, but something in him shifted. He was tired of phones, of noise, of the shallow beat of the modern world. He didn't say that, not exactly, but you could feel it in his letters, in his choice to go to India alone, to walk, to meditate, to find something. And then he disappeared. No final message. No, "I'm heading out." Just gone. He'd been staying in Rishikesh, a city long known for spiritual seekers. The Beatles came here in the 60s. So did thousands of others, searching for peace in the echoes of the Ganges. Jonathan had written to friends that he was planning a trek, possibly toward the Himalayas. Later, they found his backpack, his passport, a few clothes and belongings abandoned by the banks of the Ganga River. But no sign of him, no body, no trace. The Indian police searched the river. Posters were put up. Monks and foreign travellers were questioned. Nothing. It was as if the river had opened its arms and swallowed him whole. And that's when a new theory emerged. Something not criminal, not accidental, but psychological, spiritual. India syndrome. Some say it doesn't exist. Others say it happens all the time. A kind of spiritual psychosis, one researcher called it, where idealism and intensity converge and the self begins to dissolve. It's not uncommon. Western travelers arrive in India with high hopes and big questions. They meditate, fast, read scripture, push themselves into altered states, and sometimes they don't come back the same. Jonathan had reportedly been reading autobiographies of yogis, practicing silence, withdrawing from social contact. Some believe he entered a spiritual state so extreme he may have abandoned his identity entirely. Others think he joined a remote ashram or spiritual sect, some of which don't allow communication with the outside world. A few even wonder if he chose to disappear, but his mother doesn't believe that. Her name is Linda. She still looks for him. She once said, "Closure is my most hated word." She doesn't want a gravestone. She wants her son. She described Jonathan as sensitive, always kind, always searching. And in the months before his trip, she said he seemed changed. Not sad, not depressed, just quiet, withdrawn, like he was walking deeper into himself. He'd spoken of starting fresh, of shedding identity, of becoming something else. In his last known journal entry, Jonathan reportedly wrote, "You don't find truth. You let it find you." That line has haunted many. Was it a clue? Was it goodbye? Or was it simply the hope of someone trying to heal? Some think he slipped and drowned. Some think he's still out there, somewhere remote, hidden in the folds of a mountain town, with a new name, a shaved head, chanting mantras under the stars. Some believe his mind fractured, pushed too far by intensity, loneliness, or belief. What we know is this. A young man went in search of something holy, and maybe he found it, or maybe it took him. There are trails near Rishikesh where the mist clings to the ground like breath, where sound doesn't travel the same way, where people vanish in more ways than one. And somewhere in that space between transcendence and madness, Jonathan Spolan walked into silence and never came back. In Japan, they have a word for it, johatsu. It means evaporated people, those who disappear without a trace. Not because they were taken, but because they chose to go. And they do it quietly, deliberately, like steam rising off a kettle, gone before anyone realizes it's missing. One of them was Norihiro. He was a Tokyo engineer, a husband, a father. He wore the same suit every day, took the same train, drank vending machine coffee on the same corner at 7:52 a.m. Until one day, he didn't. His wife thought he'd gone to work, but hours passed, then a day, then a week, Eventually, she learned the truth. He'd lost his job months ago. Every morning, he'd still leave the house, but instead of going to the office, he'd sit alone in his car in a parking garage, sometimes for hours, sometimes until nightfall, pretending, until the money ran out, until pretending felt worse than disappearing. So he did. Norihiro became Johatsu. He moved into a tiny cash-only apartment in a forgotten part of the city, a place with no names on the doors, no questions asked. These towns exist in the shadows. They're called Yonige towns. Fly-by-night villages, places where the missing hide. He got part-time work under a false name. No one asked for ID. No one cared who he used to be. And at night, he walked the back alleys, not with guilt, but with relief. There are many reasons people vanish like this. Some escape debt, some abuse, some the shame of failure. Japan is a culture where reputation means everything. To lose your job, to fail in marriage, to admit depression. It's not just personal, it's social, it's disgrace. And for some, the only way out is to disappear. There are entire companies in Japan that help people vanish. They call themselves night movers, and they operate in silence. One woman, Ms. Saita, left her abusive husband at midnight with a child and her dog. She later started her own Yonige service. She said, "Sometimes people don't need to disappear. They just need someone to listen." But when there's no one to talk to, disappearing becomes a kind of therapy. From the outside, it's hard to understand. Why wouldn't Norihiro tell his wife? Why didn't he ask for help? But therapy in Japan is still taboo for many. To say, "I need help," is to admit weakness. And weakness in certain roles, as a man, a father, a provider, is unbearable. So he vanished. Not out of cowardice, but out of shame so deep he couldn't face the mirror anymore. He became someone else, or no one at all. His wife filed a missing persons report. The police shrugged. Sometimes people don't want to be found, they told her. She went to a therapist eventually to talk about her anger, her fear, her hope. Some nights I think I hear the front door. I run to it, but it's just the wind. She keeps a photo of him in the kitchen, still calls it our home, even though part of her knows he's out there somewhere, living a life without her, without his son. And some nights, Norihiro walks past a bakery that smells like the one near their old house. He stops, just for a second, then keeps walking, not looking back, not because he doesn't care, but because if he does, he might remember who he was. And Johatsu don't look back. It started in January 2021, and then it happened again and again. Men were disappearing across Luzon, one by one. Each had something in common. They were sabangueros, men involved in cockfighting. Some were breeders, some gamblers, some just fans. But they all vanished the same way. Quickly, quietly, and always without a trace. One of them was Michael Bautista. He was 36, a father of 2. He worked during the week, kept to himself, and on Sundays he watched the fights. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't deep in debt. He just loved the sport, the ritual, the noise, the blood and feathers. One day he told his wife, "I'm just going to the arena. I'll be back by dark." He kissed her cheek, picked up his keys. He never came back. At first she thought he'd been arrested. Then she thought he was hiding. Then she stopped thinking, because thinking led to places too dark to bear. She filed a report. The police were polite. They said they'd look into it. But she wasn't the only one in the station that day. There were already dozens like her, dozens of wives, mothers, sisters, all asking the same thing. Where did they go? There were CCTV clips. One showed a man being forced into a van outside an arena. Another showed 2 men being led down a hallway, never to re-emerge. Some sabangueros had reportedly won large bets just before vanishing. Others were seen talking to men in plain clothes, then gone. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was something organized, cold, and invisible. Michael's wife, Maria, stopped going to church, stopped answering calls. She'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. She said to a therapist later, "How do you grieve someone who might still be alive?" That's what they call it, ambiguous loss. And there's no proof of death, no funeral, just silence, just a closet full of shirts that still smell like him. Her children asked if Daddy had left them. She said no, then locked herself in the bathroom and screamed into a towel. Later, when she joined a support group for families of the disappeared, she met others like her, each with their own version of the same story. A man, an arena, a lost text, and then a blank page. The group was led by a volunteer psychologist. She explained that what they were feeling was real, that hope and rage can live in the same body, that guilt for not stopping it doesn't mean you're to blame. Maria said, "I keep the porch light on. He used to forget his key." They cried, they laughed, they kept each other sane. But the number kept growing. 10 men, then 20, then 34. Gone. No arrests, no explanations, just silence from the very people who should have been looking. Maria wrote a letter to the president. She never heard back. There are houses across the Philippines where the porch light still burns, where children still ask, where a seat at the table is still set just in case. Michael's sandals are still by the door. Maria dusts them once a week. And when the wind howls just right, she swears she hears him call her name. But no one ever answers. And the arena is gone. In November 2006, a man was found wandering near Kinder Scout in the Peak District. He was barefoot, shivering, covered in scratches. When hikers approached him, he didn't speak, just stared at the hills and whispered, "I've been here before." They thought he was confused, maybe injured. They called for help. What they didn't realize was that this man had vanished 5 years earlier. His name was David Wsworth, a 31-year-old landscape photographer from Manchester. In 2001, he'd gone hiking alone in the peaks. He told his housemate he'd be back by nightfall. He never returned. His car was found in a lay-by, the boot unlocked, his camera gone. They searched the hills for 10 days. Helicopters, dogs, posters, nothing. Eventually, the family held a memorial. No body, no answers. Just the aching gap where a person used to be. Then, in 2006, 5 years to the month, he appeared. Same area, same stretch of moorland, but something was different. He didn't seem to know where he'd been, or how long had passed. When asked where he'd been living, he just said, "I never left." And then, the hills kept me. His mother was called. She collapsed when she saw him. Said he looked the same, but his eyes were wrong. At the hospital, he was lucid but withdrawn. Doctors said he had mild malnourishment, exposure injuries, and signs of psychogenic amnesia, a rare condition where the mind buries trauma by erasing identity. They asked where he'd slept. He said, "The caves." They asked what he'd eaten. Moss, I think. I don't remember chewing. There were theories that he'd suffered a breakdown, lived rough for years, that he'd joined a fringe religious group or off-grid community, that he'd forgotten who he was until something brought him back. But none of it made sense. He had no calluses, no signs of long-term homelessness, no record of medical visits, job applications, or travel. No digital trace. Nothing. David was assigned a trauma therapist. Sessions were slow, delicate. At first he barely spoke, but over time he revealed fragments. There were voices in the wind, not threatening, just watching. Sometimes I'd sleep and see my mother's face, but I couldn't name her. I think I was supposed to stay gone, but I got curious. The therapist noted dissociation, possibly depersonalization disorder or catatonic depression. But even then, the case never quite fit. David showed none of the expected patterns. His memory returned in flickers, but never whole, and he often referred to his missing time as if it were real, structured, like a second life he'd lived and lost. He never spoke of other people, no captors, no companions, just the hills, the dark, and something he called the folds. "I walked between folds," he once said. It felt like stepping between 2 pages in a book, where there's no text, just silence. The therapist wrote in her notes, possibly symbolic language for dissociative states or trauma he cannot name. But she never ruled out something stranger. David lived with his mother after that. He never went back to work. He took long walks but never left the village. Some said he was recovering. Others said he was waiting for what no one knew. 2 years later, he disappeared again. Left his coat on the garden gate. No footprints, no car, no word. This time, he didn't come back. They say the peaks have places where the wind doesn't echo, where time dips like a valley, where men go walking and something else walks back. Some of these people were never seen again. Some came back, changed, and some, maybe, never left at all. We've travelled across 6 stories, across oceans, mountains, cities and shadows. And what we found wasn't just mystery, but grief, silence, and the aching need to be found. Not just by others, but by ourselves. These stories are real. The names, the quotes, the vanishings. Only the shape in which you heard them was crafted. Out of respect, out of sorrow, out of wonder. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping this channel grow. With your ears, your hearts, and your courage to stare into what most turn away from. Not every story ends. Some just stop. Some leave trails in the dirt, sandals by the door, a violin unplayed. But maybe if we remember them, they're not fully gone. And maybe, just maybe, not every missing person wants to scare you. Some just want to be believed.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.